Hello and welcome to Right Sports Talk. My name is Zach. With NFL training camps going on, I wanted to talk about players or positions from each team to watch throughout training camp. Last week, I made a list of AFC players and positions going through each division and each team. And today I'm going to talk about NFC players and positions to watch. I'm going to start off with the NFC North and then go to the East, South, and West. So if there's any specific division or team that you want to watch, you can kind of try to skip ahead in the video until you hear me talking about the team that you want or want to hear about. So first off, I'm going to start off with the NFC North, and I'm going to start off with the Detroit Lions. For me, the player to watch in training camp for the Detroit Lions is defensive end Aiden Hutchinson. Aiden Hutchinson is somebody that early last season was the front runner for Defensive Player of the Year, and then unfortunately, in Detroit's game against the Dallas Cowboys, he suffered a very gruesome leg injury that cost him the rest of the season. So for him, I'm really interested to see how he looks coming off of that injury, how he looks in camp, how he looks moving around, and can he look anything close to the form that he was last season? I know that he is a young player. He's only been in the league he's only been in the league since 2022. So he's a young player. So hopefully he can bounce back and continue to recover and still look like a very dominant player coming off of his leg injury. Moving on to the Minnesota Vikings, and for me, the player to watch for the Vikings is second-year quarterback J.J. McCarthy. J.J. McCarthy missed all of his rookie season last year with an MCL injury. He did play in the first preseason game for the Vikings last season, and he looked very good in that game before ultimately missing the rest of the season due to his injury. So I'm curious to see how he looks, coming off of that injury, because he is somebody that in college at Michigan was a very mobile quarterback. I'm interested to see how that injury affects his mobility, and can he continue to progress and look as good as he did last year in the preseason for the very limited glimpse of playing time that he got. I'm interested to see how he looks and can carry this offense. If he can do, anything close to how Sam Darnold did last season. I'm very interested to see how J.J. McCarthy, A, comes back from that injury and how that affects mobility, and B, if he can still look as good or better than he did last season in the very limited playing time he got in the preseason. Next up, for the Green Bay Packers, it's their wide receivers. So they have some very talented young receivers on their team that have only been a few of them have only been in the league for a few years, like wide receiver Jaden Reed, who is kind of their gadget, kind of do-it-all receiver. But he is somebody that hasn't really been able to stay healthy, and so can he stay healthy? You got Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs, who are very talented young receivers, and then in the draft they added Matthew Golden in the first round, and then later in the draft Savion Williams. So I'm interested to see if any of these young receivers can really take over as the true number one receiving option in this offense, especially with wide receiver Christian Watson, who had kind of been their number one the past couple of years when healthy, is injured again, and he's going to start the season on the PUP list. So, can one of the more experienced guys in Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs, step up and prove to be that number one option for Jordan Love? Or is it one of the rookies? Is it their first round pick, Matthew Golden, comes out in camp and, just shows out and dominates to be the number one receiver? Or, maybe Savion Williams. Savion Williams, another one of those kind of do-it-all receivers, kind of similar to a Jaden Reed, except a much bigger body. Savion is 6'5" and about 230 pounds. But with, that size and pure athleticism, could he establish himself as the number one? It's very interesting to see how this receiver battle works out and how long it takes before somebody can establish themselves as a true number one, or if any of them do establish themselves as a true number one. The final team for the NFC North, the Chicago Bears, the player that I want to see training camp is wide receiver Rome Dunze. He's their second year receiver. He was the number 9 overall pick last season. They picked Caleb Williams, number 1 overall, and then with their second first round pick at number 9, they picked Rome Dunze. He had a pretty good rookie season, but now that there's no Keenan Allen there, the only established receiver ahead of him is DJ Moore. Can Rome Dunze show up and be the true number 2 receiver in this offense, or even surpass DJ Moore and be the number 1 option? And has he grown enough from year 1 to year 2 to really be able to help elevate Caleb Williams, as Caleb Williams also goes from his first year to his second year in the NFL? So I'm interested to see how Rome Dunze has kind of grown from year 1 to year 2, and how he can help improve Caleb Williams, and how help Caleb Williams grow from year 1 to year 2. And moving on to the NFC East, for the Eagles, honestly, it wasn't easy to find players or position group to really talk about, because they are such a talented team that no group really stuck out above the rest. But the position group that I really want to talk about is their defensive linemen / edge rushers. They have a bunch of young guys there right now, because they lost 3 veterans in the offseason, and Brandon Graham, who retired, Milton Williams, who signed in free agency with the New England Patriots, and then Josh Sweat, who signed in free agency with the Arizona Cardinals. So now they've just got they're a very young core of defensive linemen and edge rushers, with Jalen Carter, who's going into his 3rd year in the NFL, who's very talented. And now that he's basically the number 1 option, or the number 1 guy, at least interior in that defensive line, how does he look? Can he continue to improve? And same for Jordan Davis, who's going into his 4th year in the NFL. Can he continue to improve and be the big run-stuffing defensive lineman that the Eagles picked him in the first round, a few years ago to be? And then at the edge rusher standpoint, you have Nolan Smith, who has spent a few years in the league, who is very talented. He's very athletic. Can he put it all together and take that next step as he continues to grow as a pass rusher? Can he continue to grow as a pass rusher and kind of take that athleticism and match talent with it and be a dominant edge rusher? And they also have second-year edge rusher Jalix Hunt, who, again, a very talented player. Can he continue to improve? Another very athletic player. Can he continue to improve and add talent on top of that athleticism, and continue to play well? And can all these guys continue to improve their talent and continue to make this defensive line perform as well as they did last season? Moving on to the Washington Commanders, the player personally for me to watch is wide receiver Deebo Samuel. So as of right now, wide receiver Terry McLaurin is holding out for a new contract, so he's not there. That's their number 1 option. The Commanders traded for Deebo in the offseason. Seeing him at minicamp, he looked a little bit out of shape, not quite as explosive as he has been in years past with the 49ers. So really what I'm looking for in Deebo is, can he get back into shape? Can he, show that he can be a top receiving option in this offense? There's not a whole lot of competition at receiver, especially right now with Terry McLaurin holding out. So Deebo Samuel should be able to, get first-team reps, get comfortable with Jaden Daniels, continue to work himself back into shape, and hopefully show, the talent and the ability that he showed a few years ago with the 49ers, where he was talked about as, one of the best, where he was talked about as like the number 1 option for San Francisco. Can he do that for the Washington Commanders and be, either the number 1 option if Terry McLaurin doesn't show up, or a very good number 2 option for if Terry McLaurin can get a contract worked out and does report back to the team. Next up, you have the Dallas Cowboys. For me, it is their running backs, the whole position group of the running backs to watch. They had two veteran guys that have leave in the offseason, and a very veteran guy in Ezekiel Elliott, who was there last season, or there, spent most of his career with the Cowboys, except for one season 2 years ago he spent with the Patriots. And then Rico Dowdle, who was their leading rusher from last season, who is now in Carolina. So they have on their roster right now really one guy that's been there for a couple of years, and Deuce Vaughn, who is undersized, about 5'6" and under 200 pounds. So he hasn't really been. He's kind of been injured his first 2 years in the league as well, so you don't really know what he has as a running back talent. And then they also brought in the offseason Javonte Williams from the Broncos and Miles Sanders from the Panthers. Both of those guys have really underperformed the past few seasons. Last year, Miles Sanders was dealing with a bunch of injuries. Javonte Williams a few years ago was dealing with, I believe, a knee injury. He hasn't really looked the same since then. And they also drafted Jaden Blue, rookie running back, late in the draft. So can he kind of step up and stand out above the rest to be the number one option? I think it's a very intriguing competition to see who's really going to be the number one running back in this for this offense, because there's nobody right now that really stands out as being that top option for them. So I'm very curious and intrigued to see how that position battle really works out. Next up, moving on to the New York Giants. And for me, the position to watch is their quarterbacks. As of now, they have 4 quarterbacks on the roster in Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, who they both brought in free agency. They've also got Tommy DeVito, who's been there for a few seasons. He's had some starts, but he hasn't looked super great. I think there's kind of a ceiling on him. And then a rookie quarterback they drafted in the first round in Jackson Dart. I'm intrigued to see, who really stands out as being the starter for this team. Right now, it looks like it could be Russell Wilson. But I'm intrigued to see how Jackson Dart develops throughout training camp and the preseason. See, maybe he can kind of sneak away that starting job late in camp. And I'm also intrigued to see, so I think a couple of these quarterbacks, especially somebody that like Tommy DeVito, or between Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, whoever doesn't get the starting, isn't the starter to start the season, if they could be traded, especially because the Tennessee Titans had their third-year quarterback, who's probably going to be their backup this year, Will Levis, have shoulder surgery, so they don't really have a set backup behind rookie number 1 overall pick Cam Ward. I'm interested to see who gets, who comes out the starter in this group, and B, outside of Jackson Dart, whoever is not the starter between Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, or Tommy DeVito, who could really be used as a trade candidate for maybe the Tennessee Titans, who need a quarterback right now. Moving on to the NFC South. Starting off with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the position group that I'm looking forward to seeing is their wide receivers. Right now, they only have one receiver going into the training camp that really doesn't have any question marks around them, and that is wide receiver Mike Evans. You pretty much know what you're going to get. He's a veteran. He's a very talented player. He is their number 1 receiver. He's been their number 1 receiver for most of his career. No real question marks with him. But then around him, you have Chris Godwin, who's a veteran. He's coming off of an ankle injury from last season. So his question mark is, how does he look coming off of his ankle injury? Can he, is he healthy enough to sustain, to look good and sustain his number 2 receiving role in this offense? Just behind him, you have second-year wide receiver Jalen McMillan, who showed flashes as a rookie, especially when Chris Godwin went down with his injury, but he never really was able to fully crack that starting lineup or stay in that starting lineup for very long. He was another guy that was pretty banged up last season. I'm interested to see how he improves from year 1 to year 2, and if he can become, maybe that number 3 receiving option, or surpass Chris Godwin as that number 2 option and make himself more of a fixture in this offense. And the final receiver that I'm going to talk about and I'm intrigued to see is their rookie first-round pick this season, Emeka Mbuka, who is a very talented receiver out of Ohio State. Ohio State just seems to pump out talented receivers basically every season. But I'm curious to see how he looks at the NFL level, and if he can do enough in training camp to work his way to having a significant role in this offense. If he can get above Jalen McMillan on the depth chart, or if Chris Godwin isn't fully healthy to start camp or throughout camp, if he can work his way to being that number 2 option in this offense. I'm intrigued to see how Chris Godwin comes off his ankle injury and how these young guys really work their way into the offense and if they can find a sustained role or not. Moving on to the Atlanta Falcons, the position that I'm looking forward to seeing, or the player really, is quarterback Michael Penix. This is a guy they drafted in the first round last season who sat most of the year behind Kirk Cousins. He played the final 3 games of the season. He did play very well. I want to see if he can kind of sustain that in this very talented offense, because he's got pieces around him at receiver. He's got Drake London and Darnell Mooney. He's got one of the top running backs in Bijan Robinson to throw the ball to. He's got a very talented tight end in Kyle Pitts, who has a bunch of potential because he's still a very young tight end. So I'm interested to see how he really leads this offense going into year 2, and if he's one of those guys that, again, can take a big leap from year 1 to year 2 to help be more of a leader on this offense. Moving on to the Carolina Panthers, and it's quarterback Bryce Young. Another guy, he's going into his 3rd year in the league. He did not play very well as a rookie. He started off last season very slow, didn't play well at the beginning of the season, wound up getting benched. But then after coming back from being benched, played very well at the end of the season, helped them win 4 of their last 9 games, kept them in very close games with tough competition. So I'm interested to see if he can kind of continue that going into this season, and if he can continue to take those next steps to being one of the better quarterbacks in the league, or especially one of the better quarterbacks in his division, and maybe he can help lead this offense that, again, has some talent behind him. They drafted a rookie wide receiver in the first round, Ted McMillan. They got a second-year wide receiver they drafted in the first round last year, and Xavier Legette. They got Adam Thielen, who, though is on the older side, is still a very talented receiver. So they have talent around him. Let's see if he can continue to make those strides to improve as a quarterback in this league. Finally, for the NFC South is their quarterbacks, specifically rookie Tyler Shuck and second-year quarterback Spencer Rattler. So the Saints are a team that Derek Carr retired, their veteran quarterback retired. They drafted Tyler Shuck in the 2nd round, and they have second-year quarterback Spencer Rattler. I believe those are the top 2 candidates to be the starters. So I'm interested to see how this quarterback battle works out, and if who really sticks out in this battle. I think it could possibly be a very close battle, as Spencer Rattler does have a year of experience in this offense, but they do also have a new head coach from last season, so there's a new offensive system. So we'll see how things kind of play out for the rookie Tyler Shuck and for Spencer Rattler, as they both kind of jockey for position and compete for the starting quarterback role. Finally, moving on to the NFC West, starting with the Los Angeles Rams. And for them, the player to watch for me is rookie wide receiver Jaquez Hunter. He's somebody that is a very explosive rusher, and honestly, he's got a very good chance to be the number 2 running back in this offense behind Kyren Williams. His main competition is second-year running back Blake Corum, Blake Corum is very talented, but he's not as explosive. Blake Corum is a short yardage, he's going to get you 4 yards a carry, maybe break away a big run every once in a while. But Jarquez Hunter is a home run waiting to happen every time you hand him the ball. So that is where he could really stand out in this offense above Blake Corum and really stand out to get the number 2 option in this offense, be the number 2 running back option in this offense, and could possibly, take a little bit of the workload off of Kyren Williams. So I'm excited to see how he progresses in this offense and how he really learns this offense going into his rookie season. Moving on to the Seattle Seahawks and their position group, I'm looking forward to seeing is the wide receivers. Initially, I was thinking maybe Sam Darnold was the player to watch, but after thinking about it more, I went with the wide receivers because they lost 2 of their 3 starters from last year in DK Metcalf, who they traded to the Steelers, and Tyler Lockett, who I believe they let go, and he signed with the Titans. So now they have third-year receiver Jackson Smith and Jigba poised to be their number 1 option. So how does he look being that number 1 option? They also added Cooper Kupp in free agency, who is he's going into I believe his 8th year in the NFL, coming from the Rams, who they released him. He's a guy that's dealt with some injuries the past few years. So how does he look? Can he stay healthy and carve out a role in this offense? And the battle for the number 3 receiver is also interesting to me. You have third-year receiver Jake Bobo, who has not got a whole lot of playing time his first 2 years in the league, but the limited time he has looked very talented. So can he really step up and fill the role as the number 3 receiver? Or can one of their rookie receivers, whether that be Torrey Horton or Ricky White, one of those 2 step up and take that number 3 receiving role in this offense and, maybe show enough to, if there's maybe some injuries to Cooper Kupp or Cooper Kupp underperforms in camp, can one of those 3 guys, Jake Bobo, Torrey Horton, or Ricky White, step up to be the number 2 receiving option on this team? I'm intrigued to see how their receiver battle kind of goes and who can really stand out as the top few guys in this receiving core to help out Sam Darnold. Moving on to the Arizona Cardinals, and their position to watch for me is defensive linemen. Obviously, they brought in Josh Sweat in free agency from the Eagles. They also brought in veteran defensive lineman Calais Campbell, who he's been in the league since 2008, but he's still a very talented defensive lineman, although he is up there in age. I think he's somebody that can help mentor some of the young guys they have. They've spent the past 3 years bringing in young defensive line talent. They have young guys with potential. They have their rookie first rounder this season in Walter Nolan. Can he show enough in camp and stand out and show that maybe he show as somebody that deserved his draft position? They have second year defensive lineman that they drafted in the first round last year, Darius Robinson, who only played in 6 games last season, so he's got something to prove. Again, another very talented guy that was in a very talented defensive line group or defensive line draft class last season, and he's kind of been pushed to the bottom, pushed to the back burner, and not a lot of people are talking about him. But can he come back this season and hopefully play the whole year? But show in camp that he was deserving of his draft position and that he looks good enough that he can play the whole year. And they also have defensive lineman Dante Stills, who is going into his 3rd year in the NFL. He's somebody that has started 18 games over the past 2 seasons. He's somebody that has actually got better his first 2 years in the league. So can he continue to progress and improve and really help this young, talented defensive line that has a lot of potential, but can they finally put it all together? And finally, I want to talk about the San Francisco 49ers, and their player to watch for me is running back Christian McCaffrey, because he is coming off of a very injury-riddled season. How does he look in camp? Does he look explosive? Does he look like the old Christian McCaffrey that he was 2-3 years ago? Unfortunately, with Christian McCaffrey, he has a history of playing really well for a couple of years and then he'll have an injury. So how does he bounce back from this injury as somebody that has had a lot of injuries in his career and somebody that is getting up there in age? According to teammates from minicamp, he looked really good. But I'm interested to see how that looks when they finally get into training camp, and if he puts the pads on, how he looks in pads. So I'm very intrigued to see how Christian McCaffrey looks coming off of his injury-riddled season from last year. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. If there's any specific players or position groups that you're looking forward to paying attention to throughout training camp. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Until next time, see ya.